All right, Rabosa, good morning. A great Zuchos Baruch Hashem to begin the week together in Maseches Avoda Zara. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor for Tafshin Pei Hey 5785, the Tilsa Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all the Sherman Joshua's this year as a zechus for Besoros Tavos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan Habalin Latova, Stephen Terry Zin, in loving memory of Steve's mother, Doris Zin Devora Bas Bisol Yoel, on the occasion of her 5th yard site. Our week of learning sponsors, Jeff Schwartz, in relation of his father's yard site, Shmuel Ben Shimon Halevi, Zichron Libracha, and an anonymous weekly sponsorship with gratitude for the encouragement to start doing Daf Yomi over 2,700 days ago, Maseches Avoda Zara, and celebrating this individual's Siyum HaShas, anonymous individual, beginning round 2, Baruch Hashem, of his journey in Shas. Chef tremendous Hatzlocha, Bracha, and Mazel. And of course, as always, we dedicate our learning in the schus of our precious hostages, Mechalish Baruch Hu, Meretz Hashem, bring them home b'shalom and b'karav, in the merit of our holy soldiers. May they be successful. B'chol Maaseh Yadeim u'b'chol Makom Shehem, and the schus of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael, Mechalish Baruch Hu, Meretz Hashem, shower them with Shmiri Yisira, divine protection, providence, and Meretz Hashem, may we be zocha to see Besoros Tavos, Brachos, Yeshuas, and Nechamas, victory for Klal Yisrael, for Am Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael, and Meretz Hashem in the coming days. With that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. A really just spectacularly beautiful daf ahead of us as well. A lot of fascinating ideas. Mitzvah. Today we will also get back to actually beginning the sugyas of the Mishnah, Mitzvah Hashem, which are also incredible and tremendous. So today's daf is daf Hey 5. We are picking up on Dalid Amud Beis 4b, and we left off at Gufa, which is at the 2 dots, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines up from the bottom. So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says as follows. So Gufa says the Gemara, Am Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Mai tichsev asher nochi mitzavecho hayom. So what's the meaning of the pasuk when the pasuk says, remember when we say this in Kriyat Shema every single day, Hashem says, these are the mitzvahs that I'm commanding you today. In other words, what's bothering the Gemara? Why the lashon of hayom? Why not just say asher nochi mitzavecho? Why the need for hayom at all? To which the Gemara made 2 drashas. Remember again, we've seen these before. Hayom la'asosam. So the Gemara says, teaches me that what? The Gemara says, hayom la'asosam v'lo l'machar la'asosam. To teach us that ultimately, again, there's an obligation to perform the mitzvos today and not to wait until tomorrow, or not till tomorrow. So remember again, in yesterday's daf, the way you understood this was that the concept of mitzvos applies in this world. And when we say this world, we're really referring to the pre-messianic world. But something fundamentally changes about the nature of mitzvos when Mashiach comes, which makes sense because the whole system, as we've seen, the whole system of schar va'onesh, the whole system of reward and punishment, fundamentally changes once Mashiach comes. Because once Mashiach comes and the truthfulness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes so apparent and glaring and obvious, so everything fundamentally changes. So therefore, again, hayom la'asosam v'lo l'machar la'asosam. We also added in over here that it also means hayom la'asosam, that again, the power of mitzvahs is take advantage of your opportunities today. Do not delay, do not wait, do not procrastinate. Furthermore, hayom la'asosam v'lo hayom lital scharan. Reward for mitzvahs, although we perform mitzvahs today, the reward comes tomorrow. And we'll say it's very important, right? We have an obligation to execute our spiritual mandates. We have an obligation to go ahead and execute the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, recognizing full well we may not see the reward for our actions in this world or in this time. But just the inability to see the reward in no way takes away from our obligation and our mandate to continue to do. I'm Rabbi Shmuel Levi. We'll say beautiful Gemara. Rabbi Shmuel, and we've seen this. So this is actually this is a repeat. Rabbi Shmuel Levi says as follows. So it's a gufa. Rabbi Shmuel Levi says, "Kol mitzvah sheisah osim ba'olam hazeh, ba'os u'meidos osam li'olam haba." All mitzvos that Klal Yisrael does that we do in this world come and testify in our behalf in the world to come. So Rabbi says, so b'pashtos, this sounds like it's referring, when it says olam haba, sounds like what it's referring to is after death. right? That after I die and there's an accounting for my life, the most incredible thing is I stand before the Beis Din Shel Ma'ala, the heavenly court, which of course wants me to be successful, and who's lining up there in my corner, who's sitting behind me, so to speak. Again, it's all of my mitzvahs. Every good thing that I've done comes and goes ahead and testifies on my behalf. Shneimar yitnu ideihem v'yitzteku yishmu v'yomru emes. Yitnu eidehem v'yitzteku. What does it mean? It says they will give their witnesses and they will be exonerated. Eli Yisrael. This refers to the Jews. This refers to Klal Yisrael, who when we come before judgment, before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's this incredible dialectic. On one hand, when we leave this world, there is judgment. And that judgment is not pleasant. No one likes to be judged. But after 120, we are absolutely unequivocally judged for how we lived our lives in this world, what we did and what we didn't do. So that is what it is. The beautiful part of that judgment is that Ribono Shel Olam wants more than anything for us to be successful. So to whatever degree he could leverage the law, he could leverage the judgment in our fashion. That's what he seeks to do. So every single mitzvah you do, and as we saw yesterday, like the rooster pecking in the garbage, even the smallest mitzvahs, even the smallest actions, come and testify on my behalf in the Olam HaEmes. Incredible. Yishmu v'yomru emes. They will hear and they will say truth. Elu ovdei kochavim. This refers to the idolaters who in Olam Haba will be forced to acknowledge the erroneous kite of their ways, and ultimately again have to say emes to ultimately again our system of life. Rabbi Shmuel Levi, kol mitzvot she'Yisrael osing ba'olam hazeh, ba'os v'tarfos osam li'ovdei kochavim li'olam haba pneihem. Rabbi Shmuel takes it a step further. He says all the mitzvot that we do in this world come and slap the idolaters in the face in the world to come. Right? A tremendous schema, right? A tremendous idea. That at the end of the day, right, everything that we do in this world comes back to the Ovdei Kochavim in the world to come. Shneimar ushmartem va'asisem ki hi chachmaschem uvinaschem le'inei ha'amim. So it says, interestingly enough, the pasuk says as follows, because the pasuk says, you literally again, ushmartem va'asisem, you shall keep and you shall perform, ki hi chachmaschem uvinaschem, for it is your knowledge and your understanding, le'inei ha'amim, in the eyes of the nations. So it's interesting. Neget ha'amim lo ne'emar. It doesn't say keep the mitzvahs opposite the nations. Rather, what does it say? Ela le'inei ha'amim, in the eyes of the nations. Melamed shebos v'tarfos li'ovdei kochavim al pneihem li'olam haba. Rather, what does it mean? It means that ultimately, again, the mitzvahs that we do, the spiritual lifestyle that we lead, ultimately comes and smacks the idolaters in the face in Olam Haba. But it's also interesting to note that the lashon of it, it's a tremendous diuk. Kadosh Baruch Hu says, "Do your mitzvahs because your mitzvah shmartem asisim ki chachmasom v'inaschem le'einei ha'amim." We spoke about this last week. What else get from le'einei ha'amim? Sometimes we spend so much time trying to conceal our Yiddishkeit from the eyes of the nations. Right? We try not to stand out. We try to fit in. And meanwhile, what does the pasuk says? Don't do that. Don't do that. Right? Live your Judaism. Right? Live your Judaism. Live your Yiddishkeit. Le'einei ha'amim. In the eyes of the nations. Don't be apologetic about being Jewish. Right? You have to stop by the rest stop to daven mincha. Don't take out your cell phone and pretend like you're having a prolonged conversation at a rapid pace with your lips moving like no one's business. Right? Don't do that. Why? Why do you have to do that? Why do you have to do that? Daven mincha like a proud Jew. Let your Yiddishkeit be le'einei ha'amim. People are going to stare. They're going to stare regardless. They're going to stare regardless. You're away with your family somewhere. You don't have to wear a baseball cap. I mean, if you want to wear a baseball cap, wear a baseball cap. But don't wear the baseball cap as a mechanism of concealing the external signs of your Yiddishkeit. Wear it proudly. Live it proudly. Whatever you're going to do le'einei ha'amim. Incredible. So Rabbi Shmuel Levi, lo asi Yisrael se'egel elalitin pischon pele balei tshuva. Okay, so now we come to a tremendous Gemara. And this Gemara really is profound on a variety of different levels. So we'll translate the words, and then we'll have to understand really what it is that Chazal are trying to convey. So Rabbi Shmuel Levi says as follows. Lo asi Yisrael se'egel, and I will say, by the way, the common denominator amongst these teachings is Rabbi Shmuel Levi, right? It's the author. Remember again, we know this because we've been doing Gemara long enough to know there are two ways that sugyas of Gemaras are tied together, either topically or authorically. I just made up the word. Right by the author. Right? Authorically or topically. So this happens to be done ultimately again through the author. So Rabbi Shmuel Silber says as follows. Rabbi Shmuel Silber says as follows. Lo asu Yisrael se'egel elaliton pischon pele balit tshuva. Okay. So literally translated, the only reason Klal Yisrael performed the sin of the golden calf was in order to provide an opening for balit tshuva, for penitence. Look at Rashi. Lo asu Yisrael se'egel kilomar giborim ushlitim biyitzram hayu. Klal Yisrael, when our ancestors, when we stood by Har Sinai, were giborim, were strong. We were in control, in charge of our Yetzirah. So really, it didn't make any sense that the Yetzirah should overcome our ancestors and they should build the golden calf. So what happened? Ella gzeras hamelech haisa lishlot bam. Rather, again, we're just going to translate the words literally, then we'll see what's going on over here. Rather, it was a decree of the king, right? It was a decree of the king. In the Hagos, assuming he changes it over here, litin reshus l'satan. It was a decree of the king to give the Yetzirah control over our ancestors. Why? Kadei liton pischon pele balit tshuva. In order to give an opening to balit tshuva. To people who want to do tshuva, what does that mean? Shim yomar hachote lo ashav shelo yikableni. Because let's say a person does an avera and he says, you know what, I'd love to do tshuva, but what's the point? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is never going to forgive me. Look at the severity of my sin. Look at what I've done. How could it be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would ever forgive me? Yomrim lo, we say to him, say ulamad mimaisa ha'egel shekafru v'niskablu b'tshuva. We say to this person, look at what our ancestors did by the sin of the golden calf. Look how bad that was. And if you could rebound from that one, then certainly you can rebound from anything. So I will say, so this is a very dramatic statement, and at first glance, it seems theologically troubling. Why? Because what does Rabbi Shmuel ben Levi seem to be saying? It's almost like he sounds like that this Aveira wasn't really our fault. It wasn't really us, but rather, again, it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu who went ahead and orchestrated this in order to create the opening for Balei Tshuva. So we'll say, so again, first of all, if that was the case, then we shouldn't be punished for it, right? If at the end of the day God did this, and let's say, and what was this, like a Vayichazik Hashem a slave Paro moment, where Hashem hardened Paro's heart, and what took away Bechira Chavshis? Of course not. But rather, what it means, I think, is as follows: that there are, and we'll see other examples of this, but that there are certain times where HaKadosh Baruch Hu places people in extremely difficult situations, and situations where normally He wouldn't place us, right? What do we daven for every single day? We ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu not to place us. We tell Him, Lo lidei sayon. Do not place us in a situation where you test us. Right? I know that I have strength, but don't put me in a situation that's difficult. Sometimes, just get ready for this, sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts us in incredibly difficult situations where, can I pass? Of course I can pass. But at the end of the day, it's quite probable that I won't. But the circumstances were orchestrated by God. Because why? Because sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu needs us to fail. And why does He need us to fail? Because He needs us to fail in order for us to know that we can also get back up. Now again, I'm responsible for the failure, because the one thing is, although it may sound a bit cliche, HaKadosh Baruch Hu never gives us a challenge that we cannot overcome. Remember, if He places us there, it means we have the ability to overcome it. But there might be, the deck might be stacked against us. And at the end of the probability may even be that I'm going to fail, because sometimes the failure is necessary, because that failure sets the stage for dramatic rebound and endows me with the life understanding that no matter what comes my way, I got this. And no matter how badly I fall, I have the ability to go ahead and get back up. And that's what Rabbi Shmuel ben Levi is saying. Lo asu Yisrael se'egel. So again, remember, so that's what Rashi's bothered by. Rosa, you think about this in just a moment. What's the Chita Egel makes absolutely no sense. You know, even the Meraglim make a little bit more sense. The Egel makes absolutely no sense. Your timing is off. And there are so many things of us, right? Give Klal Yisrael a date. Moshe, say, Chevra, I will be back, right? On whatever, I'll be back on the 17th of Tammuz. I'll be back on the 17th of Tammuz between 1 and 3 p.m., right? Put it on your calendar. Moshe Rabbeinu says, instead 40 days, start from now, start from tomorrow. Why? Why the ambiguity? Why all of that? So ultimately, again, Rashi's saying over here, Klal Yisrael, we're strong. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu put us in this very difficult situation, which we had the power to overcome, but we failed to do so. So again, to be clear, Rabbi Shimon Levi is not exonerating us, because if he was exonerating us, then there would not be fallout from the Egel. It's our fault. We own it. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you really put us in exceedingly difficult circumstances. So why did you, God, do that? Again, I'll own my part. But God, why did you put us in that situation? Rabbi Shimon Levi says, by design. He kind of knew we were going to fail. But the failure was an absolute necessity to future successes of Klal Yisrael. Without the abysmal failure of the sin of the golden calf, we would not have the national and individual knowledge that no matter how badly we fail, tshuva is always possible. Rabbi said, do you hear this? Do you hear how profound this is? That sometimes, the Ribono Shel Olam sets us up to fail. It sounds crazy, but sometimes he sets us up to fail. Why? Because from that failure comes ultimately, again, the growth and the seeds for all future successes. And Chevra, we all know this from our lives. You know, the most incredible thing in life is, rarely do you encounter more success as a result of life successes. In other words, success is great in life. Success doesn't usually set the stage for future success the way that failure sets the stage for future success. In other words, when you lose everything and kind of like the land is flattened in front of you, there's such a dynamic push for growth and for success, and great things come out of that. Rabbi Shimon Levi says, that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu set us up for the Egel, to teach us that tshuva is possible under all circumstances. The Gemara goes back to Shnei Mar, mi yitin vayal levav chamzeh, lira osi kol hayom. So I'll say another example of this. Listen to this. Again, I'm sorry, I said I should read the rest of it. Shnei Mar, mi yitin vayal levav chamzeh, lahem liyira osi kol hayomim. Because Rabbi said the pasuk over here is saying, mi yitin, who could make it that Klal Yisrael's heart is close to me all of the days? All of the days, to fear me and to revere me all days. And Rashi points out over here, B'sinai ne'emar zeh, ama giborim v'alisei libam b'yirasam. Kadosh Baruch Hu himself extols the greatness of Klal Yisrael and says, Klal Yisrael, you are great, your hearts are constantly. So how could it be that the same people who were so great, the same people who were so holy, ultimately did engage in this kind of behavior? It was a shtick divine setup. It was a little bit of a divine setup. The failure itself was necessary. The Gemara gives another example of this. Lo David roi la'osamaisa, v'lo Yisrael ru'uyin la'osamaisa. So what says incredible. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, David HaMelech should not really have sinned with Bathsheba. He was not really roi for that maisa. V'lo Yisrael ru'uyin la'osamaisa. And nor was Klal Yisrael really should they have sinned with the golden calf. The Gemara says, Lo David roi la'osamaisa, shlichsev belibi chalal b'kirbi. David, again, the pasuk says ultimately again about David. David literally translated, my heart is chalal, is empty inside of me, which means that David HaMelech says, I have been able to conquer my Yetzer Hara. Again, remember again, we saw this Gemara in Maseches Sanhedrin, where David HaMelech says, Ribono Shel Olam, I have successfully vanquished my Yetzer Hara. So remember again, the story with David HaMelech, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no, you haven't. And David HaMelech says, test me. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no. Right? David HaMelech says, yes. And they go back and forth, and finally HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, yes, remember the story. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells David, I'm going to test you with the matter of morality. David HaMelech is like, I got this. That night, he couldn't sleep. He's on his rooftop. He sees a flying bird. He shoots an arrow. So out of character for David HaMelech. He's shooting birds. What is he, like some kind of like weird kid? He's like putting magnifying glasses on insects. You know, what is that? What is that? What is that? He's shooting at birds, which is strange, but he shoots the bird. He misses the bird. The bird pierces a curtain on a rooftop right across. Bathsheba is bathing behind the curtain. David sees Bathsheba bathing, ultimately again becomes possessed with desire for her, sense for her, and again sparks an entire cascading set of events. So the Rabbi Levi says, David, what is that? What is that? What is that? David HaMelech that was so out of character for him. David HaMelech was the king. He could have had everything. This is a married woman. This is a married woman. What is going on over here? So Rabbi Shmuel Silber says it's the same idea. The same idea that look at finish the Gemara. So why did they sin? Top of hey, lomar lecha. Rabbi say here it is. Incredible Gemara. Shimchata yochid to teach us. Rabbi say. So what national sin? What I should say, what the cheta egel is to national sin, the sin of Bathsheba is the personal sin. To teach us the following idea. Shimchata yochid. If a person sins and they think that their avera is so terrible that they cannot rebound from it, Omrim lo, we say to him, Kelecha eitzel yachid. Literally, again, take your utensils to the individual. In other words, look at David HaMelech. And if David HaMelech can rebound from his sin, then you can rebound from yours. And if the tzibor sins, Omrim lo, Omrim lahem, Kelecha eitzel tzibor. Ultimately, look at what Klal Yisrael did by the Chet Egel. It's not incredible. So Rabbi Shmuel Silber says that sometimes the Ribono Shel Olam sets up people in impossible circumstances, almost knowing that they're going to fail. Again, I have the choice. Let's be very clear. David HaMelech had a choice about what he did with Bathsheba. Klal Yisrael had a choice about building the golden calf. But nevertheless, the Ribono Shel Olam put them in impossible circumstances, almost knowing with almost certainty that they were going to fail. But failure was part of the plan, because all of us need to encounter life abysmal failure so that we have an opportunity to recognize that we can get back up and rebuild. I could pick the pieces back up and put myself and put my life back together even better than it was before. And David HaMelech becomes the paradigmatic example of that as an individual, and ultimately, again, Klal Yisrael becomes the paradigmatic example of that in the aftermath of the golden calf. Incredible. Incredible, I will say, absolutely incredible. The two paradigmatic stories of tshuva, uncharacteristic sinful behavior, there to teach us this dramatic life lesson. The Gemara says, Utzricha. Now, why do I need two examples of this, right? Why do I need both the individual and the national examples? I'll tell you why. Because had you just given me the individual example, I might have thought that an individual can go ahead and rebound from any sin. Why? Because in general, when an individual sins, their sin is not well known, right? It's not publicized, right? A person sins, they sin to themselves. Maybe that's where tshuva is possible. Aval tzibor. But when it comes ultimately, again, and Rashi says over there, "Mefarsim chata'ehan v'ikachil ema lo lekabu." I'm sorry, I didn't read. Aval tzibor the misfarsim chata'ayu ema lo. But when it's tzibor sins, and therefore Rashi points out this chil Hashem, because there's publicity, therefore again there's desecration of God's name. Perhaps tshuva is not possible. Perhaps tshuva is not possible. And therefore again, v'yashmo'in on tzibor mishum denefishi rachamayu. Or maybe if would just told me that tshuva is possible by the tzibor, because by a tzibor, again, there's, as you saw about saying yesterday's daf, that l'maisa again, when a tzibor is together, there's a much greater manifestation of divine compassion. Maybe that's why they could be forgiven. Aval yochid dulo alima zechusei. But when a person is an individual, right? There's not such a great manifestation of divine compassion. Emalo. Perhaps again there can't be forgiveness in the aftermath of sin. Therefore, the Gemara says tzricha. Therefore, the Gemara says you need both cases. So I will say, really incredible Gemara. So therefore, again, a tremendous Musar Haskell that sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu places us in circumstances where we know we're going to fail, or I should say, where He knows we're going to fail. Again, not that I don't have the ability to be successful. I do. Because remember, if I can't be successful, I can't be held accountable. So the Ma'aseh HaKadosh Baruch Hu places us in circumstances where the probability is that I'm going to fail, but the failure itself is a necessary part of my growth. The failure ultimately, again, sets the stage for my ability to pick up the pieces, rebuild, and remind myself throughout the rest of my life that no matter how badly things come tumbling down, I have the ability to build myself up. Klal Yisrael shows us at a national level by Chet Egel, and David HaMelech shows us this on a personal level with the sin of Bathsheba. Behind Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, I'm Rabbi Yonasan. My Dichsiv, what's the meaning of the pasuk? Ne'um David ben Yishai, une'um hagever, hokam he's quoting over the pasuk from Shmuel Beis. So that's right. It's Nu'um David ben Yishai Nu'um Gever Hukum al Mashiach Elokei Yaakov Uneim Zmiros Yisrael. So the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, David. I'm sorry. Hukum al Nu'um David ben Yishai Shehekim Ola Shel Tshuva. So or Ula Shel Tshuva. So ultimately, again, what does it mean? Hukam. What does he lifted up? David HaMelech was the one who lifted up the yoke of Tshuva. He's the one who lifted up the yoke of Tshuva. Incredible. And also, just to point out, by the way, it's interesting, right? It's interesting to see. Well, okay, we'll come back to it, because from both of these stories of David and Bathsheba, it is fascinating to see kind of what came out ultimately again of both of these Averos, and how the relationships changed fundamentally, but how ultimately, again, they changed in a way that benefited the parties involved. But we'll come back to that if we have time. Rabbi Shlomo Nachmani, I'm Rabbi Yonasan. So we'll say, so that's the end of that sugya. We'll say, I just want to point out, this is probably the most important tshuva sugya in all of Shas. What you've just seen over here is the paradigmatic tshuva sugya in Shas. That no matter how badly you mess up in life, there is always the ability for personal or national redemption. If the Am sins, Cheta Egel tells us that ultimately, again, tshuva is possible. If an individual sins, David HaMelech teaches us that tshuva is possible. And Rabbi says, so there's the tshuva vart, and then there's also the recognition, and it's important to understand that sometimes, sounds strange, but the Ribono Shel Olam sets us up to fail. Why? Because sometimes in life, the failure is more important than the success. Sometimes the failure itself teaches me more than the win. It's a bitter pill to swallow, and it's a difficult lesson to learn. But I think all of us have enough life experience under our belt to know exactly what this Gemara is talking about. Because in those moments of failure, in the aftermath of that failure, sometimes the dynamic growth and the knowledge about myself is so profound that it arms me for so many more future successes. Incredible Gemara, so much more to say about it, but let's go by it. So beautiful. Rabbi Shmuel Nachmani says, so we actually saw this quoted in yesterday's daf. Gemara like this, quoting yesterday's daf. There's also Gemara in Sota. So those of us who just did Sota also saw this Gemara. So whoever does a mitzvah in this world, that mitzvah literally precedes him and walks before him to the world to come. So this is reminiscent of the previous Gemara that we saw, that halacha l'maisa, when you do a mitzvah, that mitzvah testifies on your behalf in olam haba. So again, it's like mamish, like putting away for retirement. Such a most beautiful and incredible thing, knowing that every single good thing I do, big or small, is going to be waiting to testify on my behalf after 120. Shneimar, v'holich lifanecha tzidkecha, ukivod Hashem yasvecha. On the other hand, v'chala over avera achas melafafafto umolichasa liyomadin. But whoever commits an avera in this world, I will say, is actually a profound Gemara. Melafafto. Melafafto literally means, Rashi says, ma'atafto, lashon malbush. It clothes you, or literally, it wraps itself around you and drags you to judgment. Shne'emar yelafto archos darkam. So I will say, it's actually interesting to note the difference in the dynamic between a mitzvah and an avera, right? It's interesting. What does it say? You do a mitzvah, and what happens? What happens to the mitzvah? Where does it go? What does it do? It's like, wherever it is, it's walking ahead of you, it's traveling ahead of you, going to meet you after 120 at the Yom Adin. Yet you commit an avera. What does the avera do? The avera wraps itself around you, and ultimately, again, almost drags you to the Yom Adin. So why doesn't the mitzvah wrap itself around me, right? Why doesn't the mitzvah? So let's say we know this from our own lives. It's an incredible thing about ruchnius. A person could go ahead and do a mitzvah. A person could go ahead and, engage in such beautiful ruchnius. And then I will say, what could happen literally in the next moment? What could happen in the next moment? Right? No one wants to answer, right? What could happen in the next moment? Like, I commit just a tremendous avera. And it makes no sense. And all of us have had moments like that. And I'm like, what? Like, what just happened over here? Right? I'm doing literally what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, I'm living the good life. Like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And yet, I just did this. How does that happen? Because ruchnius is a fickle friend, right? Because ruchnius, as much as you have of it, it doesn't necessarily fully safeguard you from the pitfalls of life. So you could perform a mitzvah, but lav dafka, that mitzvah is safeguarding you against all the negativity. V'haraya, many times in life, I have to go ahead, I do mitzvahs, and yet they don't safeguard me against the performance of averos. That's the nature of spirituality. That's how the Mishnah Abba says, Atamin ba'atzmecha ad yomoscha. Do not believe in yourself until the day that you die. Why? Because no matter how spiritually strong you think you are, at the end of the day, we're weak, we're susceptible, and we are never above temptation. Mitzvos are incredible, mitzvos are profound, mitzvos help us, mitzvos bolster us, but mitzvos are not an insurance policy against sin. The only insurance policy against sin is heightened, constant, consistent vigilance. That's it. Averas, on the other hand. What happens with an Avera, both say? What happens with an Avera? I commit an Avera, and that Avera wraps itself around me. The tentacles are all over me. I feel the change in myself immediately. I feel it, and it is so hard to rid myself of it. It is so hard to pull it off me. It's milafafto. The tentacles wrap themselves all around me and drag me here and drag me there. It's tremendous. It's this inequality. It's this profound inequality between averos and mitzvos. That the effect that averos have on us is so much more profound and so much more intense sometimes that the effect that mitzvos have on us. That's milafafto or malichas liyamadin. Incredible. Rabbi Lazar Omer, kshurabo kikelev. When you go ahead and you perform an Avera, they'll say, what is it like? It's like that dog that follows you everywhere. I'm not going anything else on dogs, right? I'm just saying, right? Lemais, right? Fascinating, right? It's like that dog that it's that stray dog that you fed once. You fed it once. And what happens once you feed it once? It's your friend for life. It's going to follow you everywhere. The Gemara says, Shnei Amar, v'lo shama eleha. Lishkov etzla liyos ima. Shabbos is a famous drasha. Rashi makes this drasha. Rashi quotes the Gemara. So by Yosef and Eshes Potifar. So what happens? The pasuk says Yosef did not listen to her. V'lo shama eleha. He did not listen to her. Lishkov etzla, to literally sleep next to her. Lios ima, to be with her. So if you notice, by the way, the lashon itself is redundant. Why does it have to say both Lishkov etzla v'lios ima? Rather, Lishkov etzla ba'olam hazeh. To sleep with her means to commit the Avera in this world. Lios ima bi'olam haba. To be with her means in the world to come. That Yosef understood that whatever decision he was going to make now was going to have lasting ramifications and repercussions upon him. I'm Reish Lakish. I'll say beautiful Gemara here. So I'll say, so again, I just want to point out, these Gemaras are gold. These Gemaras are gold. This is life. This is life. So Gemara number 1, you could be about tshuva no matter how badly you fall. Gemara number 2, understand when you do mitzvos, every single thing you do, big or small, will be waiting for you to testify on your behalf in the world to come. But unfortunately, those mitzvos are not an insurance policy against averos. Only hypervigilance is the insurance policy against averos. When I do an avera, though, however, just understand every decision to indulge, immediate pleasure, to give me temporal pleasure, understand, is going to be wrapped around me like a dog. It's just going to be following me everywhere in life. Now again, I can obviously reference back to Gemara number 1. The good news is, even if the dog of the avera is following me, I can do tshuva. I'm never stuck. So Gemara says, Amr Shlakish, let Reish Lakish says we should have a karas for our ancestors. Why? Because had our ancestors, and I will say, Rashi understands over here that Reish Lakish is talking about the Chet HaEgel, sin of the golden calf. Had they not sinned, anu lo ba'u liolam, we would not have come to the world. Okay, what does that mean? Shnei Amar, ani amarti Elokim atem uvenei elyon kulchem chabaltem maasechem achin ke'adam tumusun. Because the pasuk says, I said, Elokim atem, you, Klal Yisrael, you're like God, you're so holy. Uvenei elyon kulchem, and you are people of Aliyah. However, afterwards, chabaltem maasechem, we committed averos, and as a result, achin kadam tumusun, you will die like regular people. So we'll say, so what it sounds like the Gemara is saying over here is like this. But had we not sinned at Har Sinai, we would have been more angel than man. And therefore Rashi points out over here, full of holy dubanim. We would not have had a desire for any kind of intimacy, and therefore again we would have never had children. And therefore again our ancestors would never be here. So therefore the Gemara says, we should have tremendous gratitude to our ancestors that they sinned, for because they sinned, therefore we are here today. So the Gemara says, one second, is that true? So therefore, had they not committed the Cheta Egel, they would not have had children. So the Gemara says, but the Pasuk in Torah says, you have to have children. At least you have to attempt to have children. What's going on over here? Ad Sinai. So the Gemara says, no. What it means is there would have been children. What the Gemara is suggesting is the obligation of Puru Ravu would have applied up until our Sinai, but not post Sinai. So the Gemara says, B'Sinai namiksiv leich amar lahem shuva lachem la'ahalechem. But by Sinai itself, it says, right, after this, remember Moshe Rabbeinu commanded they had to, men and women, right, they had to separate, husband and wife had to separate during the 3 days of preparation for Matan Torah. And then after Sinaitic revelation, Moshe Rabbeinu says, go back to your tents. Go back to your tents was a euphemism for you could resume normal marital activity. The Simchas Ona, that was just, again, for the joy of being with one's wife, lav dafka for procreation. I've haksiv leman yitav lahem ulibnehem. But the pasuk says, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I'll do good for you and for your offspring. La'osan ha'omdin al har Sinai. That refers to the offspring, ultimately, again, that we already had before Har Sinai. Whereas Vamar Shlakish, what does it mean when it says this is the Sefer Toldos Adam? Literally, again, Gemara says, "V'chi Sefer Hayil Adam Arishon." Did Adam Arishon have a Sefer? Right? Adam Arishon wrote a Sefer. He had a book of Adam. What's that? Melamed, rather, what it means is like this. Supposed to say very beautiful Gemara. Melamed, Sherlock Kadosh Baruch Hu Adam Arishon, Dar v'Dar Shav. Kadosh Baruch Hu showed Adam Arishon all the future generations of humanity. Dar v'Chachamav. Each and every generation and its scholars. Dar uparnasav, each and every generation and its leaders. Kevan shegila dar Rabbi Akiva. Once he got to the dar, suppose it's such a beautiful Gemara. Once he saw Adam Rishon, the generation of Rabbi Akiva, samach b'Torah. So Adam Rishon was overjoyed about the Torah that Rabbi Akiva would introduce. Benis atzei b'misaso. When he saw the death of Rabbi Akiva, he was incredibly distressed. Amar v'li mayakur re'echa. Remember Rabbi Yossi? Ein ben David bar. Further again, Rabbi Yossi. So all of these are Gemaras highlighting this idea that of course people have to have children. In other words, what does it mean? Whereas bothered by this idea that had we not sinned with the golden calf by the Cheta Egel, so Klal Yisrael we would have been like Malachim and would have never had future generations, never had children. So what does that mean? All of these psukim, all of these midrashas indicate that clearly they were always going to be future children. Rabbi Yossi Ein ben David ba at shichlu neshama shebaguf. Rabbi Yossi says this is beautiful. Rabbi Yossi says, Mashiach only comes until all of the neshamas leave the guf. So we'll say, what is this a reference for? Remember again, we saw this Gemara Mizachas Yivamis. So there is a chamber in Shamayim called the guf. That's the name of the chamber. Mashiach only comes when the neshamas are emptied out of the guf. Only when the neshamas. Rabbi say this, by the way. One of the beautiful things, one of the reasons why there is such simcha when a child is born. Besides the fact that it's just simcha when a child is born, but one of the beautiful reasons why there's simcha when a child is born is because every single birth is a fundamentally recognizable and measurable step closer to Mashiach. All of the neshamas have to come out of this chamber called the guf in order for Mashiach to come. Incredible. Shnei Emar, ki lo li olam arev v'lo netzach echtzov kirach melafana yatov u'neshamas ani asisi. So what's going on over here? So how can you say, had we not sinned by the golden calf, by Cheta Egel, there would not have been children in the world? So the Gemara says, lo tema anu lo bana li olam ella kemi shelo bana li olam. Rabbi says it's very beautiful. Rather, the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't have come to the world. Rather, what does it mean? It means that at the end of the day, it's as if we would not have come to the world. What does that mean? Look at Rashi. Rashi is right across from Tosas Ki. So it's incredible because it's fascinating. What the Gemara is suggesting is, had we not participated in Cheta Egel, we would have been blessed with immortality, and therefore again they would have lived forever. And because we still would have had children, but because they were so righteous, we would have been like nothing in their eyes. So had they not committed Cheta Egel, they would have lived forever. They would have been so righteous, and we, their offspring, would have never measured up to their righteousness, and therefore it would have been as if we were never born. Incredible. So that now you're saying that had they not built the Egel, they would have never died, we would have lived forever, there would have been immortality? Is that true? V'haksiv, the Gemara says, V'haksiv, Parshas Yivamis, Uparshas Nachlos. But I will say, there are sections in the Torah that by definition deal with death, like Yibum, like the laws of inheritance, Al Tanai. No. Those sections were written in the Torah, conditional sections. What does that mean? That those sections were written is, if you're going to be punished with mortality, then these sections apply. But if you're going to be immortal, then these sections don't apply. So Gemara says, one second. Are there sections of the Torah that are written on condition? So Gemara says, the Haki Amar Rabbi Shimon Lakish, Mai Dichsiv, Vayera Vayvoke Yom Hashi. We just saw this Gemara. Vayera Vayvoke Yom Hashishi. It was evening, it was morning, the sixth day. Why Hashishi? Malame Shisna Kodesh Baruch HaMai Sebereshis, Va'amar. The entire creation was done on al-tinai, on condition. Hakadosh Baruch Hu says to creation, if Klal Yisrael accepts hashishi, right? Chamishe chumshei Torah. If we accept Torah, good, then ultimately you'll be sustained. But if Klal Yisrael does not accept Torah, you won't be sustained. So what do you see from here? Hakadosh Baruch Hu does create al-Tanai. And therefore the Gemara is suggesting over here that really, had we not built the Egel, we would have lived forever. And therefore the only reason why there are sections in the Torah that have to do with death is that was the contingency plan. Hakadosh Baruch Hu plans for everything. So the contingency was if we mess up and now there's mortality, these are the halachos that apply. Maybe the Gemara says, Mi yitain v'haya levavam zeh. I'm sorry, Mi yitain v'haya levavam zeh. So again, to go ahead and be mevatel malach hamaves, that's impossible. That's impossible. Why? Because again, the gezerah was already handed down. So Gemara says, "Halu kibi Yisrael satorah ele kadei shelo tei uma v'lashon shalat es bahem." So again, at the end of the day, what's the power of Torah? The power to be mevatel death. That you can't do, because that's already been decreed. So what's the power of Torah? The power of Torah is that no other nation should have the ability to go ahead and vanquish us. Shene'emar lemayitav lahem ulivneim ad olam. So the Gemara says, well, so what do you see from here? You see from here that Allah said death is part of the grain, right, of the human condition. So what's going on over here? Huda'ar ki'aitana, the sign of Rabbi Yossi Omer, lo kiblu Yisrael satorah ella. No, Rosa, there is another opinion. Rabbi Yossi says the power of Torah was such, before we built the Egel, the power of Torah was such is that it could have vanquished death. Torah is so powerful that it could overcome death itself. Shene'emar, both say first wide line, Ani amarti Elokim atem uvenei elyon kulchem. So again, because Cheshbon literally, when I gave you the Torah, you had the ability to kivyachal become divine. Unfortunately, chavalte masechem, you messed up, and as a result, achein ka'adam tamusun, you will die like mortals. You will die like mortals. So Rabbi says, so Torah itself had the ability to vest us with immortality. To vest us with immortality. But then we messed up, and as a result, the Malach HaMavis has control over us. Rabbi Yossi Nami Haksiv, Lemayitav Lahem, Ulibneim Ad Olam. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi, what do you do with the pasuk? So Rabbi Yossi will say, Tova hu dahavya hamisa ika. Ultimately, again, no. It could very well be that lamaisa, the good could endure forever, but there would still be death. Rabbi Yossi Amar Lacha, Kevan Deleka Misa, Ein Lecha Tova Gidol Misa. Rabbi Yossi will say, no. Once there's no death, ultimately, again, there's no greater good than this. I B'Tanakama Nami Haksiv Achein Ka'Adam Tamusun. I B'Tanakama, it says, pasuk says that you will die like mortals. My Misa Anios. Could very well be that what does Misa, what does death mean in this context? Poverty. The Gemara will say very profound Gemara, because ultimately, what do Gemara say? Arba nechashuvin kemesim. There are 4 people who are considered to be like dead, even though they are very much physically or biologically alive. Who are they? Ve'elohein, Ani, a poor person, Suma, a blind person, Mitzora, a person afflicted with saras, umisha in labanim, and ultimately someone who unfortunately does not have children. So I'm going to go through each of these. Ani dichsev kimesu kol ha'anashim, because we'll say pasuk says this is by Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe, you can go back to Egypt. This is where Moshe Rabbeinu ran away after killing the Mitzri. So Hashem says to him, you could go back to Egypt. Why? Because all the people who wanted to harm you are dead. Uman hinu, who were these people? Dasan va'aviram. Umi Mesu, the Dasan Aviram die. Mi Havi Havu, they were alive. They were in the desert. Ella Sheyadu min Echseim. Rather, they became impoverished. And I will say it's actually a very profound Gemara. People like to say that money problems aren't problems. People say, at least you have your health, right? It's true. It is good to have your health. Rabbi say anyone who's ever been in financial distress knows that it feels as bad as death, right? Not knowing how you're going to pay your bills, not knowing how you're going to survive, not knowing how you're going to make ends meet is a tremendous, tremendous pain. Yeah, you might have your health, and you might have a lot of other things, but when you don't have money, that absolutely causes an existential pain, Chazal says, as great as death. Incredible. Next, so the Gemara says, Suma, how do we know about Suma? D'chsiv, b'machashakim hoshivani kimsei olam. Literally, again, in darkness, HaKadosh Baruch Hu led me like the dead. So you see, if you're in that darkness, blindness, because sometimes be as painful as death itself. Zara d'chsiv, anati kimes. So ultimately, by Miriam, when Miriam is afflicted with saras. So again, Aaron says to Moshe, don't let Miriam be like she is dead to us. That when she's barren, she says to Yaakov, give me children, and if you don't, it is as if ultimately again I am dead. So we'll say, so again, just to point out over here, so just fascinatingly enough, so the idea over here is a fundamental machlokes, by the way, about the notion of immortality. So when we received the Torah, what exactly was the power of Torah? Was Torah meant to literally, again, vanquish death forever? And as a result of the Chet HaEgel, we unfortunately, again, were once again cursed with mortality? Or no, mortality was always part of the equation. There was always going to be death. So what's the power of Torah? Torah gives us the ability to overcome any nation which stands in our way. So fascinating, fundamental machlokes, ultimately again about what occurred. Now obviously, however you see the power of Torah, that dictates the chain of events afterwards. Because again, how do we view ourselves kind of in light or in relationship to our ancestors? Okay, so fundamental, profound machlokes. The Gemara goes weiter. Pasuk says, Chazal Baruch Hu says to us, if you follow in my ways, if you walk in my ways, ein im halashon tachnunim. We will say the lashon of im is lashon of supplication. That Kiviyachal HaKadosh Baruch Hu pleads with us, asks of us to please follow in his ways. Such an incredible Gemara Bosai. The Rebbe Shalom Bosai, this is part of the motif that we see over and over. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants our success more than we want our success. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu could be demanding, HaKadosh Baruch Hu could be exacting, HaKadosh Baruch Hu could be punishing, but yet the way he chooses to relate to us is, please, will you please follow in the ways of my mitzvos? Please. Can you imagine this? The King of Kings speaks nicely to us, which first of all models for us how we're supposed to speak to each other. But the King of Kings, is he wants us to, please walk in my ways, please follow my mitzvahs. So Omer, Lu Ami Shomeali, Kimat Aidei Machnia, Omer, Lu Hikshafta Mitzvosai, Vihi Kanar Shalomech. And again, the rest of these psukim say, if only you would listen to me, please listen to me, all of these brachas will come. Vihi Kichol Zaracha V'Tzetzai Meir, Tan Rabbanon, Miyitain, V'Hayala Bavam Zeh. So I'll say this is a really profound Gemara. So we quoted this pasuk already a number of times before. So the pasuk ultimately again is when Moshe Rabbeinu is recounting the events in Dvarim and ultimately making reference over here to Chet HaEgel. So Miyitain V'Hayala Bavam Zeh. So ultimately, literally again, who can give? Literally the way the Gemara is understanding is like this: Miyitain, who could help over here? V'hayala vavam zeh, that Klal Yisrael's heart will always be aligned with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who could help? To align Klal Yisrael's heart with the Ribono Shel Olam. So the Gemara says, Amar lahem Moshe Yisrael. Moshe says to Klal Yisrael, Kafui Tova b'nei Kafui Tova. Wow. Moshe Rabbeinu kind of lays him out. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Klal Yisrael, Kafui Tova b'nei Kafui Tova. Ingrates, the son of ingrates. Right? Speaking to us, B'shah Shomer HaKadosh Baruch Hu liYisrael, Miyitain v'hayala vavam zeh. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Klal Yisrael, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to you, Miyitain, who could help you maintain your heart in a state of allegiance to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Hayalahem lomar tein ata. Klal Yisrael should have said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you. We need it from you, right? We need your help. We need you to go ahead and ensure our spiritual success. And what happened? And unfortunately, Kafoi Tova. How are we Kafoi Tova? And we'll come back to why it's Kafoi Tova in just a moment. So ultimately, why were we Kafoi Tova? Because at the end of the day, again, when it came to the man, what did we call the man? We called the man this corrupted bread. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us our food, our daily sustenance each and every day, and yet we lacked the most simple sense of gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, let me just tell you what's happening over here outside for just a moment, then we'll go back inside. Moshe Rabbeinu says, right, there's this moment of incredible spiritual relationship for Klal Yisrael, right? We say Na'aseh v'nishma, we're on this tremendous level. So the question then becomes, who can help us ensure that we maintain this heightened spiritual level? What was the answer? Klal Yisrael should have reached out for help to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but we didn't. Instead, we said we felt we could go at it on our own. Moshe Rabbeinu says, do you know why you didn't reach out for help? Because you're a kafoi tova, because you're an ingrate. Because Klal Yisrael, you're ingrates. You complained about every single thing. Now Moshe Rabbeinu calls us B'nei Kafoi Tova. We are the children of ingrates. Who was the ingrate? Tichsev Ha'isha Shenasata Imadi Hi Nisnas Nalim Ha'etz Va'ochal. And again, this is pretty serious stuff. Moshe Rabbeinu, again, the Gemara says, we're the sons of ingrates. Who Adam HaRishon. Right? Because Adam HaRishon, at the end of the day, when confronted with his sin, what does he do? He blames it on Chava. Instead of owning his mistake, what does he do? He deflects. Chava, who was his life partner, Chava, who gave him everything, gave him life, gave him a future, instead he turns on her and deflects. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, Klal Yisrael, you are ingrates, the son of ingrates. Now, what does being an ingrate have to do with not asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for help? So if you look at Tosas back on Amud Aleph, there's a beautiful Tosas, a short one, Kafoi Tova. So Tosas says, Kafoi Tova, Lekach Karam Kafoi Tova, Shelo Ratzu Lomer Ata Tein, Lefi Shelo Hayu Rotzim Lahachzik Lo Tova Bekach. So when someone is an ingrate, they also don't want to have to express thank you to anyone. So because of that, Klal Yisrael needed Hashem's help, but they wouldn't ask for help. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, you have attained this incredible level of spiritual standing. Who is going to help you maintain it? Klal Yisrael should have reached out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but Klal Yisrael refused to reach out to God for help. Why? Moshe Rabbeinu says, that's being an ingrate. Just like an ingrate doesn't say thank you, an ingrate doesn't go ahead and acknowledge the good that has been done for them, so too an ingrate won't reach out for help. Because if I reach out for help and someone does something for me, then what? Then I have to say thank you. Then I have to acknowledge that. And I don't want to have to acknowledge the good that anyone else does for me. As a result, I won't ask for help. As a result of not asking for help, I'll fail, because that's the way life works. So Moshe Rabbeinu lays them out, ultimately again for this incredible trespass. Af Moshe Rabbeinu, we'll say 2 lines down. Af Moshe Rabbeinu, lo ramzal in Israel achar 40 shana. Now, interestingly enough, when does Moshe Rabbeinu bring this up to them? It's interesting. This happens in Sefer Dvarim, right? So this is only at the end of the 40-year sojourn in the desert. Shene'emar, ba'olech eschem ha'midbar 40 shana. Uksiv v'lo nasan Hashem lachem leiv ladas ad hayom hazeh. So it's interesting. Even Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't bring this up at the time of the Chet Egel. Instead, he brings this up 40 years later. Amar Rabba says, what do you see from here? Shma mina lo kai inish adaite dirabe ad arba shnin. So interestingly enough, what do you see from here? That sometimes a person doesn't really even understand the full greatness of his teacher until after he's been learning with him for 40 years. So it's actually really profound that even Moshe Rabbeinu didn't chap the entire godless of the Ribono Shel Olam until 40 years into the job. And I will say, sometimes we also don't appreciate the greatness of our teachers, of our leaders, of the person that we learned from, until a sustained amount of time later on. So even Moshe, it's interesting, even Moshe Rabbeinu didn't chap Klal Yisrael. You could have gone ahead and asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu to help you maintain your spiritual standing. Just reach out for help. But you refuse to reach out to help. You know why you refuse to reach out for help? Because you're ingrates. Unfortunately, again, ingrates, the son of ingrates. And when a person can't express gratitude, they don't want to reach out for help. Because if I reach out for help and someone does something for me, then I have to express gratitude towards that person. They'll say, we're not going to do it today, but you'll just look on your own. There's a beautiful Tosas on the end of Hayam and Aleph, where Tosas goes through this dynamic a little bit more, that if Moshe Rabbeinu didn't chap this until 40 yeyears later, why is Klal Yisrael held accountable? Okay, Ayin Sham, you'll take a look at it on your own. Amar Rabba, Rabbi Benai, My Dichsiv, this is a beautiful, beautiful Gemara. A beautiful Gemara. We'll start it today, but we won't end it today. I'm Rabbi Yochanan, Mishnah Binoi, my dichsiv. And we'll say, don't worry, by the way, Avoda Zara, these are like Babelach dapim, like it's nothing over here, we're fine. Someone else says as follows, I'm a Rabbi, can even take a day off and we're going to be fine. You know what? I'm kidding. I'm Rabbi, Shmamina, I'm sorry, I'm Rabbi Yochanan, Mishnah Binoi, my dichsiv. Ashreichem Yisra, Ashreichem Zore al Kol Mayim, Mishalche Hashar, Mishalche Regal Hashar B'Achamar. Shabbos said it's incredible. What does it mean when it says, praiseworthy are you? Speaking to Klal Yisrael. Praiseworthy. Actually, we'll say, no, I'm going to stop here for today. We're not rushing. Plenty of time tomorrow. Shabbos say, ridiculously amazing Gemara tomorrow. And Amir Hashem tomorrow, we actually get back to the sugya of Avoda Zara, of Shloshim Lifnei Dayan. Shkayach, everyone. Tremendous. Everyone, Zoom. Have a great day, everyone. Yeah, our brothers in Eretz Yisrael, Hatzlacha, Shmira Yisera, Hashkacha Pratis, Emir Hashem, and Halavai, Soros Tavos, all of Klal Yisrael.